The legislative machinery in Washington has a way of taking abstract concepts, like affordability, simplification, and fiscal responsibility, and turning them into pages of dense statutory language that most Americans will never read. But every so often, that machinery produces something that lands directly on the kitchen tables of millions, changing the monthly math of household budgets in ways both subtle and profound. The recent move by Congress to overhaul the federal student loan system, wrapped inside the sprawling One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed into law on July 4th, 2025, is exactly that kind of tectonic shift. It's being sold as an exercise in simplification, a way to cut through the thicket of confusing repayment plans that have bewildered borrowers for years. And on its face, that promise holds true. The current landscape, an alphabet soup of save, pay, IBR, and ICR, each with its own formula for calculating payments and its own timeline for forgiveness, is undeniably a mess. The new law promises to replace that confusion with just two clear paths forward: a streamlined, tiered standard plan and a single income-driven option called the Repayment Assistance Plan. But as with most things that emerge from the Beltway, the devil lives in the details, and those details reveal a story that is far more complex than simple simplification. To understand what's really happening, you have to look at the mechanism of the new income-driven plan, the RIP, and compare it to what came before. For years, the philosophy behind income-driven repayment was one of generous subsidy, a recognition that a college degree shouldn't lead to a lifetime of financial strangulation. The now defunct SAVE plan, championed by the previous administration, was the apotheosis of that philosophy, offering payments as low as 5% of discretionary income for undergraduate loans and covering unpaid interest so balances wouldn't grow. It was, in many ways, a safety net woven with remarkable compassion. The RAP plan, however, represents a fundamental recalibration of that idea. It shifts the focus from subsidy to sustainability, from the borrower's immediate hardship to the long-term cost to the taxpayer. The Congressional Budget Office has already confirmed that the changes embedded in the new law will reduce federal deficits by hundreds of billions over the next decade, largely by requiring borrowers to pay more. Under the old SAVE formula, a single borrower making $50,000 a year might have paid around $110 a month. Under the new RAP structure, that same borrower is looking at roughly $210. It's a difference that over a year adds up to more than $1,000. Real money that now flows from a family's budget back to the Treasury. The redefinition of the repayment timeline is perhaps the most striking change for anyone who has been eyeing the distant horizon of loan forgiveness. The old income-driven plans, like Pay, held out the promise of a clean slate after 20 years of payments. For graduate borrowers, it was often 25. That promise has now been pushed back by a full decade. The Repayment Assistance Plan extends the forgiveness timeline to 30 years. This isn't just a bureaucratic tweak. It's a fundamental restructuring of the loan's life cycle. For a borrower in their late 20s, 30 years of repayment means they will be making payments well into their late 50s, carrying that debt through the peak years of saving for a home, funding their children's education, and building retirement nest eggs. The monthly payment might be more manageable under an income-driven formula, but the total amount repaid over 3 decades, compounded with interest, becomes a staggering sum. It transforms the loan from a temporary burden into a lifelong financial companion, one that only departs when a borrower is approaching the twilight of their career. This legislative overhaul also takes direct aim at the pipeline of future debt by imposing hard caps on borrowing, a move that fundamentally changes the calculus for graduate and professional education. For years, the Grad Plus program operated with a blank check philosophy, allowing graduate students to borrow up to the full cost of attendance, a policy that many critics argued incentivized universities to simply raise tuition prices, knowing the federal spigot would remain open. That era ends on July 1st, 2026. After that date, graduate students will be capped at $20,500 per year and $100,000 in total. Professional students, those in law, medicine, dentistry, and similar high-cost fields, will have a higher ceiling, $50,000 annually and $200,000 in aggregate. The message from Congress is unmistakable. The blank check has been revoked. The hope is that universities facing students with a hard borrowing limit will be forced to confront their own tuition inflation, to find efficiencies, or to offer more institutional aid. The risk, however, is that this simply shifts the borrowing burden to the private market, where interest rates are higher and consumer protections are thinner, potentially creating a new class of debt that operates outside the federal safety net entirely. For a specific and often overlooked group of borrowers, parents who took out PLUS loans to send their children to college, the new law creates a ticking clock of existential urgency. Parent PLUS borrowers have always existed in a kind of limbo, with fewer repayment options than the students themselves. The new rules threaten to push them off a cliff if they don't act before a hard deadline. After July 1, 2026, parents who fail to consolidate their PLUS loans into a direct consolidation loan will be permanently locked out of all income-driven repayment plans. Their only option will be the standard repayment plan, which for a typical Parent Plus balance of $100,000 could mean monthly payments exceeding $700. For a family already stretching to cover expenses, that's a catastrophic budget breaker. The window to avoid this fate is narrow and unforgiving. Borrowers must consolidate before the deadline and then navigate the transition into the income-based repayment plan, the only remaining income-driven option for these loans. It's a complex, high-stakes maneuver that requires an awareness of the deadline and an understanding of the bureaucratic maze, a combination that is all too rare. The Department of Education has urged borrowers to submit their consolidation applications by April 1, 2026, to ensure processing is complete, a warning that has the quiet desperation of a public service announcement for a looming natural disaster. Beyond the mechanics of loans and interest, there is a deeper philosophical shift embedded in the fine print, one that redefines how the government views a family. Under previous income-driven plans, the calculation of a borrower's ability to pay took into account the full weight of their household responsibilities. A family supporting not just children but also a spouse or elderly parents saw that reality reflected in lower monthly payments. The new Repayment plan narrows that definition sharply. Under its formula, only dependent children who are claimed on a tax return count toward family size. A married couple supporting an aging parent, a common reality in multi-generational households, will see their payment calculated as if that parent does not exist. The financial impact is staggering. An analysis cited in multiple reports illustrates the point. A married borrower earning $75,000, supporting 2 children and 2 elderly parents, might have paid as little as $35 a month under the old SAVE plan. Under the new RAPE, that payment skyrockets to around $335. It's a change that doesn't just increase revenue. It actively erases the government's recognition of a fundamental social reality, shifting the burden of care entirely onto the shoulders of the borrower. The implementation of these changes is happening on an accelerated timeline that has caught many in the higher education world off guard. Normally, major overhauls to federal student aid are subject to what's known as the HEA Master Calendar, a built-in delay designed to give schools, servicers, and students adequate time to prepare. That calendar would have pushed the effective date of these rules to July of 2027. But Congress, in a clear signal of its intent, explicitly directed the Department of Education to have these changes in place by July 1, 2026, effectively waiving the standard waiting period. The department has interpreted this as an implicit mandate to move forward, publishing a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking in January of 2026 and opening a 30-day comment period that closes on March 2nd. The speed of this transition means that borrowers who are currently in school or who are planning to enroll in graduate programs in the near future are facing a moving target. Those who enroll before the deadline may be grandfathered into the old rules, retaining access to Grad Plus loans and more generous repayment terms. Those who start after will enter a completely different financial universe. For the roughly 8 million borrowers currently enrolled in the SAVE plan, the path forward is particularly murky. The plan has been tied up in legal challenges, with payments placed in a forbearance that has offered a temporary reprieve from monthly bills. But that forbearance is not free. Interest has been accruing since August of 2025. And those months in forbearance, crucially, do not count toward the 120 payments required for public service loan forgiveness. meaning that teachers, nurses, and public servants are losing valuable time. Under the new rules, these borrowers will eventually be transitioned out of SAVE, with the final deadline set for July of 2028. They will have choices, the new RAP, the revised IBR, or a standard plan, but each choice comes with its own trade-offs. The era of the $0 payment, a feature of the old income-driven plans for the poorest borrowers, is ending. The new RAP requires a minimum payment of at least $10 a month. It's a symbolic floor, a statement that even those with the barest means must contribute something, a small but powerful symbol of the new austerity that now defines the federal approach to student debt. In the end, what Congress has passed is not merely a simplification of the student loan system. It is a renegotiation of the contract between the government and the borrower. The old contract, particularly in its final iterations under the SAVE plan, was generous, perhaps unsustainably so, from the perspective of the Treasury. It treated student debt as a social good, a burden to be shared collectively through progressive repayment terms and eventual forgiveness. The new contract is harder, leaner, and more focused on the bottom line. It asks borrowers to pay more, to wait longer for relief, and to accept that the government's definition of affordability has boundaries that are drawn more tightly than before. For the millions of Americans who will navigate this new system, the simplification will be real. Fewer forms, fewer confusing choices. But simplicity, in this case, comes with a price tag attached, one that will be paid monthly for decades by a generation of borrowers who thought they had already signed up for a different deal. The mailers from loan servicers will arrive eventually, explaining the new options in clean, simple language. But behind that language lies a story of political choice, of budgetary priorities, and of a nation quietly recalibrating what it owes to its own citizens.